The bar smelled like iron and smoke, and the kind of despair that settles into wooden beams over decades. Kale had been in worse places. She reminded herself of that every time she ordered another drink she didn't finish. The orc sat 3 stools down with his back to the wall and his eyes on the door, the way soldiers learned to sit in places they didn't entirely trust. He wasn't a soldier. She'd already clocked that. No unit markings scored into the ridge of his jaw, no ceremonial scarring along the knuckle plates. He was just a big male with green-gray skin and a quiet face reading something on a battered datapad, occasionally glancing up at the entrance and then back down without urgency, the way people look at doors when they're waiting for someone who probably isn't coming. Kale had been watching him for 11 minutes. She'd been counting. She ordered her 3rd whiskey, let it sit, and told herself she was going to leave. She'd told herself that 47 minutes ago when she first sat down. She'd told herself that on the transit pod over, leaning her forehead against the cold glass, watching the city's underbelly scroll past, the district's lower tiers full of Orc-run market stalls and old human repair shops sitting side by side in that uneasy way that passed for peace these days. She told herself she was just going for a walk. Then a drink, then one more drink, then maybe. Maybe nothing. Kale didn't finish her sentences anymore, even in her own head. She watched the orc turn a page on his datapad and quietly disagree with something, a small involuntary exhale, a slight tilt of his head to the left, the way people react to bad dialogue in old films. He hadn't looked at her once. That was why she was still here. Every male in this bar had clocked her within 30 seconds. Him she'd have to earn. "You're watching a show," she said, not to him, kind of to him. He looked up. His eyes were amber, not the burning, aggressive amber of the warcast breeds she'd grown up fearing, but a quieter amber, like sunlight through river water. He looked at her the way someone looks at a sentence they've already read twice, trying to decide what it actually means. "Old cereal," he said, "human-made. From before the consolidation. Any good?" "The dialogue is terrible." He paused, but the silences between the dialogue are extraordinary. Kale picked up her unfinished whiskey and moved 2 stools over, leaving one between them. A negotiated distance. He didn't pull back, but he didn't lean in either. He just watched her arrive the way you watch weather come in over a ridge, patient, noting, not afraid. "Kale," she said. "Drav." She pointed at his datapad. "What's the show?" He turned it so she could see the thumbnail. 2 small figures on an old Earth City street, backs to the camera, walking away from the viewer into a wash of orange light. Human-made, like he said. She recognized the aesthetic, late 20th century, before humanity had stopped making things purely for themselves. "I've never seen it," she said. "Most people haven't. It was obscure even when it was made." "Why do you watch obscure things?" He thought about that with the kind of genuine consideration that most people reserve for important questions, not bar conversation. "Because," he said slowly, "the things that didn't sell very well are usually the ones that were actually trying to say something." Kale hadn't meant to stay past 1 drink. She signaled the bartender for 2 more. The city was called Verath Station, not the official designation, which was some protectorate number string that nobody used, but the name the residents gave it after the orc architect Verath, who designed the lower tiers 200 years ago with wide streets and rooftop walkways and great vaulted transit arches, because he'd believed, as a matter of philosophical principle, that cities should make inhabitants feel welcome rather than managed. He'd been controversial. They'd named a city after him anyway. Kale had lived here for 4 years, and she still didn't feel welcome in it. She didn't feel unwelcome either. She felt approximately nothing about it, which she'd told her counselor twice, and her counselor had written down both times and looked at her with that particular silence that meant she was supposed to say more. She never did. She didn't have more. The nothing was the whole thing. She'd come here after her brother died. That was the official reason. The job transfer, the new district, the fresh start, all of it was the official reason. The unofficial reason was that she'd been running from every city she'd ever lived in and had run far enough that she'd hit an orc district and run out of places to go. Varath Station was the last stop. She told herself that was fine. She still had the bridge token in her jacket pocket, just in case. She didn't examine the token too carefully. She didn't examine most things too carefully. That was another sentence she'd started but never finished, somewhere around month 3. "Do you ever think about time?" she asked Drav. They were walking. She'd suggested it and he'd agreed with the same quiet readiness with which he seemed to agree with most things that didn't involve him being pushed. They were moving east through the lower-tier markets, past Orcrun stalls selling spiced meat skewers and repurposed tech components, and what appeared to be a very enthusiastic debate between two elderly orc females about the structural integrity of hand-woven transit baskets. "In what sense?" he said. "In the sense of whether you'd want to go back, if you could." He was quiet for a few paces. Not uncomfortable quiet, not considering how to deflect quiet, just thinking quiet. She was starting to be able to tell the difference. "I think," he said, "that the things I'd want to go back and change are precisely the things that made me able to walk here tonight." That's a careful answer. It's an honest one. "You can be both." "You can," he agreed. "Then mild are you?" She stopped at a stall selling something wrapped in dark leaf and steamed over rocks. The vendor, an enormous orc female with arms the circumference of Kale's torso and a smile like a sunrise, held one out. Kale had no idea what it was. She took it. "No," she said, answering Drav's question. "I'm mostly not." "That's also honest." "I have my moments." The street opened into a wide market square lit with hanging lanterns. Orc style, the old designs, warm amber globes on chains between the buildings, swaying slightly in the thermal draft from the lower-tier vents. Kale looked up at them without meaning to. Her neck tilted back. The whole square above her full of small, suspended lights, amber like Drav's eyes, amber like the old show's city street. She thought, "I have been here before. Not this square. This feeling. This exact quality of temporary peace, the held-breath certainty that something good is happening right now and will be gone before you understand it." She'd had it once, the night before Mick died. They'd sat on their old building's roof in the rain, splitting a terrible bottle of wine, laughing about nothing in particular. The memory had become a kind of wound she kept pressing, because at least wounds proved the thing had been real. "The lanterns," Drav said, not asking. "They're beautiful. They're old Varathira design. The modern ones are more efficient." He looked up at them with her. "I prefer these." "Less efficient things often are." "Preferable." "Real," she said. "They feel more real." He turned his head slightly toward her in the amber light. He had, she noticed for the first time, a small scar along his left jaw, not ceremonial, not symmetrical, the kind of scar you get from not ducking fast enough once. It made his face look lived in. She found she was grateful for that. "You said earlier," he started and stopped. "I say a lot of things earlier. You said you came to Varath Station 4 years ago. You didn't say why." "My brother died." She said it flat, the way she always said it. No wind-up, no softening, just, "My brother died." She'd learned that was the only way. Any other approach let people try to help, and she wasn't ready for help, and watching people try and fail was worse than the thing itself. Drav said nothing. He walked. After a moment he said, "What was his name?" Nobody ever asked that. They asked what happened. They asked how. They said, "I'm so sorry," as if the apology closed anything. He asked the name. "Mick," she said, and the word came out more carefully than she'd planned. He was 26. He made the worst jokes in any room he was in. He collected old transit maps. Transit maps. He said they were like fossils, proof that places existed in specific ways at specific moments. She paused. He had about 800 of them, I don't know what I did with them." "You know exactly what you did with them," Drav said gently. She glanced at him. He was watching the lanterns. "I put them in storage," she said. "On Meridian. I couldn't keep them and I couldn't throw them away." "Sounds right." "Is that," she stopped, "is that what you do?" "I don't know, but it sounds like something someone who loved him would do. Not keep them because keeping them was too much. Not throw them away because throwing them away was too much. Find a third option." He paused. Mick sounds like he would have appreciated the lateral thinking. Kale laughed. She hadn't meant to. It came up the way things come up when you've been holding them down too long, sudden, almost startled sounding real. "He would have," she said. They ended up at a restaurant Drav knew. A Bangladeshi place in the lower eastern tier that had been run by the same human family for 3 generations. The kind of establishment so embedded in its neighborhood that the surrounding Orc businesses had started putting up the same style of lighting outside without quite noticing. The interior was all warm, shimmering amber, and the couple who ran it greeted Drav by name, and looked at Kale with the specific warmth reserved for people brought in by regulars who didn't usually bring people in. They ate. Kale discovered she was hungry in the way that sneaks up on you after weeks of not being particularly hungry, all at once, urgently, her body reintroducing itself. She cleaned her plate. Drav noticed without commenting. He told her about himself with the same quality of careful honesty she was starting to understand, was simply how he was built. He'd grown up in the Orc territories, left at 17, spent 6 years doing transit engineering across Protectorate stations, ended up in Varath Station because the work was good, and the lower tier felt like something his grandmother would have approved of. He watched human-made serials from before the consolidation, because he found them instructive about what humans had been when they were only talking to themselves. He preferred rivers to oceans. He disliked citrus but ate it anyway on principle, because he thought irrational dislikes should be resisted. "That's an unusual principle," Kale said. "I have several unusual principles." "Name another one." He thought, "I believe the most important things anyone ever says are the things they say quietly." "Like what?" "Like," he considered his glass, "like when someone tells you something true about themselves in the middle of a sentence that's technically about something else." Kale's hands were still on the table. "You noticed that?" "Didn't I just say the most important things are said quietly?" He looked at her directly now, amber eyes level. "You said you came here after your brother died. But the way you said it, the flatness of it, that wasn't grief. That was armor over something still moving underneath. You've known me for 2 hours. I know, I'm sorry if that's intrusive. I won't." "No," she said. "Don't." She waited a moment. "Don't stop." He didn't. "What's still moving?" he asked. She'd had the bridge token in her jacket pocket for 8 months. She'd carried it from Meridian to New Sector to Varath Station. She'd told herself it was a kind of insurance, not a plan, not a decision, just a door left ajar. Something she could reach for if the nothing got heavy enough that it stopped feeling like nothing. She hadn't told a single person. It had become the shape that her secret made in her chest, a small constant pressure like weather before it breaks. She put it on the table. Drav looked at it. The token was Meridian issued, the old transit type, no longer used. She'd found it in Mick's jacket after. She'd never known whether he'd been carrying it for the same reason. "How long?" Drav said. 8 months. With you every day." "Yes." He didn't reach for it. He didn't reach for her. He put both his hands flat on the table, large and steady, and looked at the token the way you look at something you're taking the full weight of. "What was the day you found it?" he asked. She told him. They stayed at the restaurant until the couple who owned it began putting up chairs with the apologetic non-urgency of people who didn't want to rush valued guests. Then they walked. The lower tier at late hour was a different creature. Quieter, the market stalls dark. the transit arches lit from inside and humming, the occasional night shift worker moving through with the purposeful efficiency of people who'd claimed the city's off hours as their own. Drav walked at her pace. He didn't try to fix anything. He asked questions that weren't really questions, observations delivered gently enough that answering them felt like choice rather than confession. What had Mick's laugh sounded like? Whether she still listened to the music he'd liked? Whether she'd told anyone else about the token? No, she said, never. Why me? He said, not accusatory, just wanting to know. She thought about it. The honest answer was that she'd had 2.5 whiskeys and was somewhere past the armor layer and hadn't intended any of this. The honest answer was also that he'd asked what her brother's name was and that had undone something she hadn't known was done up. Because you asked his name, she said. Because you asked his name and you didn't flinch at the answer and you didn't immediately start talking about yourself. Drav was quiet for a stretch of street. Then, he sounds like he was worth knowing. He was the best person I knew. Then the city got a gift when you came here for him. Cale stopped walking. Drav took 2 steps before he registered and turned. He looked at her. The transit arch above them was humming its low, steady note. She was standing with both hands at her sides, not crying, just standing with that particular stillness that happens when something finds the exact gap in the armor and goes cleanly through. That's an extraordinarily kind thing to say, she said. It's a true thing, he said. Those are usually the same. She put the bridge token in his hand. She didn't explain it. He didn't ask her to. He looked down at it, felt its weight. It was light, trivially light, the weight of nothing. And then he looked at her and she watched him understand exactly what she was giving him. Not an object, a surrender, an 8-month secret and a door she was choosing to close from this side. He folded his hand around it. Okay, he said, just that. Okay in the Orc convention, with the falling intonation that meant received, held, kept. They walked on. She went back the next night. She told herself it was because she'd left her jacket. She had not left her jacket. It was hanging on the back of her door at home exactly where it always was. She went because the evening before had cracked something open, and she was afraid of what would grow back in the gap if she didn't keep it open deliberately. The way you keep a wound clean, not because it's comfortable, but because you know what infections are. She sat at the same stool, ordered the same drink, didn't finish it. He wasn't there. The bartender, a human male with the weary competence of someone who'd been listening to other people's stories for 30 years, brought her a second glass she hadn't asked for and said, "He was in earlier. Left something for you." A folded piece of actual paper. The texture of it was startling. Humans had stopped using it for casual notes a generation ago, but Orc culture had never fully abandoned it. She unfolded it. 3 words, "Come find me." Below that, an address in the mid-tier and the name of a transit arch stop she'd never used. She went. The mid-tier was different from the lower levels. Older in some ways, the architecture more human-scale despite the Orc broad streets, a district that had been human residential before the consolidation, and had become mixed in the way that Verath Station tended toward. Not by policy, not by plan, but by the slow gravity of people who simply needed a place and found one. The building at the address was a converted industrial space, the kind that had housed transit equipment in the pre-network era and had been repurposed over decades into studios, small workshops, archives. Drav met her at the ground-level door. "I didn't know you'd come," he said. "I didn't know either," she said, "until I was here." He had been, she gathered from the smell of cutting oil and warm metal, working. The studio inside was transit machinery, old components, pre-network era, some of it older than either of them, laid out on work tables in various stages of disassembly. The scale of the components was Orc proportioned. The care with which they'd been arranged was something else. "You restore old transit equipment," she said. I restore the things that kept cities moving, he said, when they were made by people who believed cities should move. She picked up a component, a transit relay coil copper wound, the kind used in Verathera arch systems. The same principle as the lanterns. The same principle as everything worth keeping. She set the coil down. Why did you want me to come here? He was across the worktable from her, and he didn't answer immediately, and she understood this was one of the important things said quietly moments, because he was choosing his words with the deliberate care of someone who didn't want to get the important thing wrong. Because last night, he said, you gave me something very heavy to hold, and I wanted you to know I was still holding it, that it hadn't changed anything, that you were, he paused, welcome here in the city as yourself. The nothing in Kale's chest did something complicated. It didn't go away, she understood it probably wouldn't, not quickly, not ever completely. But it moved, shifted its weight, the way a stone in a river moves from the constant, patient work of water. I have a condition, she said. Name it. You have to show me how all of this works. She gestured at the workshop. The components, the old systems, I don't know any of it. He smiled. It was the first time she'd seen him smile fully, and it was, she noted clinically, helplessly extraordinary. That, he said, will take more than one evening. I know, she said, I'm accounting for that. The thing about the nothing, Kale had learned, was that it was not actually nothing. It was a full container of a specific thing, the pressure of everything that had happened with no vocabulary to describe it, no shape that fit, no place to put it. It sat in her chest exactly like a stone, and she'd been carrying it for so long she'd forgotten she was carrying it. It had become background, weather, landscape. Drav didn't try to remove it. He didn't offer solutions. He did something that turned out to be considerably more radical. He treated her like someone whose history was real and whose present was interesting. He asked her questions and listened to the answers with his full attention, and occasionally pushed back when she said something flat and deflationary about herself, not combatively but with a mild, specific disagreement. I don't think that's quite accurate. Which was how she learned what it felt like to be gently, persistently contradicted on the subject of her own worth. It was uncomfortable. She kept coming back. They ate together 3 more times that week. They walked the city's night tier, the thermal vent routes, the rooftop walkways, the long transit arch corridors that glowed amber at their apexes and smelled of warm metal, and the century of orc and human breath that had condensed into their walls. She learned about transit relay systems. He learned about orbital mapping, which had been her work before she'd stopped caring about her work. They discovered they both hated synthetic citrus flavoring for different but deeply compatible reasons. They discovered that they both paused at the same kind of moments in old films, the quiet beats between the loud things, the silences that the dialogue existed to frame. She found herself laughing more frequently than she had in 2 years. She found herself sleeping past the hour at which her anxiety usually surfaced. She found herself, one morning, buying new coffee from the orc vendor at the lower tier market instead of using the packet she'd had on her shelf for 8 months because she'd stopped expecting to need it. And standing at the vendor's stall with the new packet in her hands, she understood slowly, like sunrise, what she'd done. She'd stopped expecting to need it. She turned this over carefully, the way you handle something that might be fragile. It was not a cure. She knew the difference between a cure and a direction, but it was a direction, and that was more than she'd had in longer than she wanted to count. That evening, she went to his workshop and told him. She didn't dramatize it. She sat on the stool she'd claimed by the 3rd visit and said, I think something has changed. Drav set down the relay coil he'd been examining. He gave her his full attention. Tell me. She told him, the coffee, the morning, the slow understand of what her body had done quietly without asking her. He listened with his hands still on the work table and his amber eyes on her face. When she finished, he said, That's enormous. It doesn't feel enormous. The enormous things rarely do from inside them. They feel like, he searched for it, like the first day of spring, just slightly warmer than yesterday, and then you look around and everything's different. You have a very specific mind. You said that last week. You're starting to repeat yourself. You're starting to remember what I say. I've been doing that since the bar, he said, and the quiet straightforwardness of it hit her like light hits a room when someone opens a curtain. Not blinding, not dramatic, just suddenly warm everywhere. The trouble started, as trouble often does, with an attempt at something good. She found the time machine on a Tuesday. That was not precisely accurate. The thing she found was not technically a time machine. It was an Orc deep archive retrieval system, the kind used by the old Orc historical record keepers to reconstruct and re-experience documented past events from retrieved temporal sensory data. It had ended up, in the way that ancient and extraordinary technology sometimes ends up, in the storage annex behind Drav's workshop, packed in a crate marked Relay Components, DAMAGED, and apparently forgotten by everyone including the Orc Record Keepers Guild that had owned it before the consolidation. She found it while looking for a relay coil he'd sent her to retrieve. She opened the crate, saw what was inside, and spent 40 minutes reading the archival documentation before she went back to him. "Drav," she said, "what's a temporal sensory retrieval unit?" His response, she would later think, was the first sign that she was about to make a significant mistake. He went very still. "Where," he said, "did you find one of those?" She showed him. He looked at it for a long time without touching it. Then he said, "These were decommissioned after the consolidation. The guild found that people were using them to go back to moments they'd lost rather than to document historical record." You can actually go back to documented moments within the stored data range. The unit has to have been running, recording. It creates a local temporal sensory record within its field radius. He paused. This one has been running in this annex for approximately 300 years. She stared at him. 300 years of recorded temporal data. Yes. Including, he confirmed very quietly, the years before Mick died. The stone in her chest shifted again, differently this time. She told herself she was going to look just once, just to remember his voice clearly. She'd been losing it, the exact timbre, the way it moved between registers when he was trying not to laugh, just to sit in a recorded moment and hear him. She went back to the afternoon before he died, the roof, the rain, the terrible wine. It was extraordinary. The system's sensory reconstruction was imperfect, slightly off in the peripheral edges, colors a shade too saturated, the rain having a particular unreal quality like rain in an old photograph. But Mick's voice was exact. His laugh was exact. The way he held his glass and told her that their wine had achieved what few wines achieved, which was the simultaneous impression of being both cheap and offensive. She sat in the reconstructed moment for 2 hours, and came back with her face wrecked and her chest emptied in a way that felt clean. She went back the next day, and the day after. She told herself it was grief work. She told herself it was therapeutic. She told herself the counselors would approve of this, the confronting, the revisiting, the processing. She did not tell Drav. She began going back further. Not to mix last week. She had enough sense to understand what that road looked like. She went to their childhood, the old apartment on Meridian's mid-ring. Mick at 12, building a transit map collection that was already beginning to strain the available wall space. Mick at 15, explaining to her with the magnificent certainty of a teenager that the Protectorate's education system had fundamentally misunderstood the point of history. Mick at 20, thin and bright-eyed at his first orbital survey job, calling her on a comm link with terrible signal to tell her the stars from the survey platform were unbelievable, just unbelievable. "You have to come out here eventually, Kale. You have to see this." She began visiting moments he hadn't known she'd witnessed. Standing at the edge of a reconstructed memory, watching him be ordinary, eating breakfast, arguing good-naturedly with his supervisor, stopping to look at a transit map in the window of an archive shop with the specific expression he got when something struck him as beautiful. All of it entirely ordinary, and therefore entirely unbearable in the way that the ordinary is always the unbearable part. She didn't go to Drav's workshop for a week. He found her at the bar. He sat down without preamble and ordered a drink he didn't want and said, "You found the retrieval unit." She looked at him. "Yes." "How long?" "9 days." He was quiet. The bartender moved away from their end. The bar's ambient sounds filled the space between them, the low conversation of other patrons, the distant hum of transit arch systems, the small human and orc noises of people existing side by side in a city built for both. "What have you been going back to?" he said. She told him. He listened. When she finished, he said, "You haven't been sleeping." "How do you?" "I know what your face looks like when you've slept." He looked at her directly. "And I know what it looks like when you've been somewhere that has no night." The retrieval unit didn't replicate circadian time. Days in the archive were as long as she made them. "I wanted to keep him," she said. "I'm losing the details. His voice is going the way voices go. I thought if I could just—" She stopped. "Hold him still," Drav said. "Yes." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "If you kept going back to a room where someone used to live, would that be the same as having them back?" She knew the answer, no. "And if you spent enough time in that room, would you start to forget the difference between the room and the person?" Longer pause. "Yes." "Kale." He said her name the way he said important things, quietly, with the full weight of his attention on the word. "The version of Mick you're going back to is a recording. The Mick you remember, the one who had the terrible wine opinion and the transit map collection and the unbelievable stars, that one is alive in you. That one goes where you go. That one has already been here, in this city, in every conversation you've had about him." She felt something run down her face. She reached up and found it was real. "The recording," he continued, "is a copy of a moment. The memory is the moment itself, still happening, still changing you." He paused. "That's not nothing. That's not something you need a machine to reach." She let herself cry. It was not the controlled, managed grief she'd gotten practiced at, the functional variety, the kind you could do quietly in transit pods and then fold away before anyone noticed. It was the real kind, ugly and irregular and necessary. Drav didn't move toward her. He put his hand on the bar between them, open, the bridge token still in his palm. She hadn't seen him take it out, but there it was, placed between them like a thing being returned. She put her hand over it. His fingers closed gently around hers. The bartender, with the profound discretion of 30 years in this profession, found somewhere else to be for a while. She went back to the retrieval unit one last time, not to relive. She went to say goodbye properly, not to Mick, who didn't need it and wouldn't have wanted it, who would have said in his particular register between registers, "Kale, I'm literally a data reconstruction. Please go eat something." She went to close the door on her own terms. To walk through a reconstructed afternoon with her brother's voice playing in the peripheral air and understand that the afternoon was over, had been over for 2 years, and that the overness of it was not a wound but the shape of something real. She stood in the reconstructed rain on the roof. She listened to his laugh. She said, "I'm going to go now." The reconstruction didn't respond. It wasn't him. It was the shape a perfect summer day left in the air of a room long after the summer ended, and you could stand in it and feel the warmth, but the warmth was yours, not the day's. The day was gone. What remained was what it had made of you. She left the archive. The workshop smelled of cutting oil and warm metal, and the specific undertone of her own history in this place. The visits, the conversations, the relay coils she'd learned to name, the mornings she'd spent at the work table while Drav explained the transit authorities' systematic replacement of things worth keeping with things that were merely efficient. She found him at the work table. He looked up. She said, "I think I'm done with it." The unit. Yes, and she chose the word carefully. The weight. He put down his tools. "You're sure?" "No, but I think sure isn't the point. I think the point is," she thought of him, all those weeks ago, asking what Mick's name was. The way the question had undone something in her that she hadn't known was done up. She thought of the lanterns in the market square, the restaurant with the shimmering amber light, the old human cereal with the extraordinary silences, the transit token, light as nothing, that she'd handed across a bar to a person she'd known for 2 hours because something in her understood that it was time. "I think the point," she said, "is that I already know what it takes to keep going. I've known it since Meridian. I just needed somewhere to put it." Drav considered this for a moment with his characteristic unhurried thoroughness. Then he said, "Did you find somewhere?" "I'm standing in it," she said. There was a silence. Not an empty silence. The workshop was full of sounds, the hum of the city's transit systems through the walls, the distant Orc market sounds drifting up from the lower tier, the ambient warm noise of a place that people had been working in for a very long time. But a silence in the way that Drav had first described the old human cereal, extraordinary. "I should tell you something," he said. "Tell me." He was quiet for a moment in the particular way that meant he was choosing carefully. "When you first came into the bar," he said, "I was watching the door because I come there sometimes when things are difficult, not because I expect anyone, just because being somewhere with other people without being required to perform for them helps." He paused. "I was having a bad week." She held this carefully. "What kind of bad week?" "The kind where the nothing gets loud." He met her eyes. "I don't say this to compare. I say it because when you sat down 2 stools away and ordered a drink you didn't finish, I recognized something. I don't know what to call it. A quality." "A weight," she said. "Yes." She thought about what that meant. That the bar and the night and the watching and the walking had not been quite what she'd thought. Not only one person needing to talk and one person listening. Something more mutual. 2 people finding each other at the same edge and stepping back from it by facing it together. "I'm glad you were there," she said. "I'm glad you moved stools," he said. She laughed. He smiled. Outside, the city did what cities do, hummed and moved and breathed, and ran its 10,000 small ordinary miracles of people existing beside each other in the amber, and the iron and the dark, keeping each other warm by the simple fact of presence, the ancient and extraordinary human and orc technology of not being alone. Weeks became the easy rhythm of 2 people learning to be part of the same daily geography. She brought coffee. He made space at the work table. She learned the names of relay components in Orc script, and he learned the names of orbital survey formations in the human notation system her brother had taught her. They disagreed about the ending of the old human serial. She found it too neat. He found it appropriately earned, and the disagreement became a recurring argument they both clearly enjoyed having. She began working again. Not urgently, not frantically, but with the returning competence of someone who'd found out, via the long way around, that they still had things they wanted to do. She submitted a survey analysis she'd had half finished for 3 months and experienced the unfamiliar sensation of genuinely not minding whether it was accepted. She stopped carrying the bridge token. Drav still had it. She hadn't asked for it back and he hadn't offered it. It was just somewhere that wasn't her pocket, and that was enough. One afternoon, the lower-tier market loud outside, the workshop humming its warm, steady note, the relay coil she'd been cleaning now clean in her hands, she said, "I've been thinking about the maps." Drav looked up from his own work. Mick's maps. I've been thinking about getting them out of storage. He put down his component. He was careful with his attention in the way she'd come to understand as a form of respect. He didn't offer a reaction immediately. He let the thought breathe. What would you do with them? He said. I don't know. She turned the coil in her hands. Look at them, put some of them up. Let them be in a room again instead of a sealed crate. She paused. He would have wanted them to be somewhere people could look at them. That sounds right. He would have liked this city, I think. He would have spent the first 2 months mapping every transit arch. The Verathera ones particularly. He would have lost his mind over the Verathera ones. She smiled. It was the real smile. She could feel the difference, had been learning the difference. He would have wanted to know you. I would have liked to know him, Drav said, simply without performance. The afternoon light came through the workshop's high windows, not amber, just the flat, honest light of a clear sky, good and clean. Kale set the relay coil down and found she didn't want to pick up the next task just yet. She wanted to stay in the specific moment, not capture it, not replay it, not secure it against loss. Just inhabit it the way you inhabit good things, fully, temporarily, without grasping. The transit arch outside hummed. The city moved around them, both the way cities move around people who have decided to stay. The bridge token turned up again in spring. Drav set it on the work table one morning without ceremony. Between the relay coil she'd been cleaning and the data slate she'd been annotating, and she looked at it and then at him. I've been thinking, he said, about what you gave this. And you gave it the meaning of a door you could leave by. He looked at it. I've been wondering if it should have a different meaning now. She picked it up. Old Meridian Transit token, Mick's jacket, 8 months in her pocket. Several weeks in Drav's hand. It was light as nothing. It was heavy as everything. What meaning? She said. A door you came through, he said, instead of out. She turned it over. The Meridian City seal on one face, worn almost smooth. On the other face, in the old notation Mick had taught her to read from the transit maps, the line designation for the station near their old apartment. Home, in the dead notation of a city she'd left. She looked at the notation and felt Mick very clearly. Not the reconstruction, not the echo, but the real thing. His presence in the knowledge he'd left inside her, the way people leave themselves behind in everything they've taught you. The transit maps, the wine opinions, the stars you have to see, Kale, you have to see them. She was seeing them. She was here. She put the token in her jacket pocket, not the inside pocket, not the hidden place she'd kept it before, but the outer pocket, the regular one, where she kept things that belonged to the ordinary working day, where she kept things she wasn't hiding. Okay, she said, in the Orc intonation Drav had taught her without meaning to. Falling cadence, received, held, kept. He looked at her for a moment with his amber eyes in the workshop's good, honest light. Good, he said. Outside, the city was doing something magnificent, being a city. Transit arches moving, market stalls opening, orc and human voices mixing in the lower tier the way voices mix when you stop keeping them separate. Lanterns not yet lit, it was daytime, that was evening's business. But present, hanging on their chains, amber glass already warming in the morning. Kale thought, I will come back here tomorrow. Not as a plan, not as a bargain, just as the thing she intended to do, the way she intended to keep working and keep learning the names of things and keep arguing about serial endings, and eventually, when she was ready, drive to Meridian and bring back 800 transit maps and put them somewhere that Mick would have approved of. She intended to be here tomorrow. She intended to see the stars. That, she thought, was more than enough to start with.